Okay, today we are going to change the brake pads and rotors on a 2013 Smart ForTwo. So before I get started, I just want to say that I am not a professional auto mechanic. I'm just a guy that owns a smart car. I like to do work on cars on my own if I can. So these are simple jobs, changing brakes, changing oil, that anybody can do. So I'm going to go through the step-by-step process, and hopefully I can help somebody on the internet who may be interested in how this works. So alright, so you can see that I have the smart car on a floor jack. I've jacked it up off the floor. I've taken the wheel off. That's all really basic stuff. There's three lug nuts that hold the wheel on. When you do this, you should really break them loose. So loosen the lug nuts while the car is on the ground, then jack it up so the tire is not touching the ground, and take the lug nuts all the way off. I also put the tire underneath the frame of the car so that if for some reason the floor jack fails, my wheel will not slam into the ground. The car will hit the rim, and if it ruins the rim and the tire, that's better than ruining the wheel itself. So the tools that you'll need to do this job are here. So we have various wrenches. So I have two different breaker bars. So I have a half-inch one, and then I have a smaller 3/8 inch. A breaker bar is a tool that everyone should have if you're going to work on cars, especially older cars, because it's always hard to get these bolts off, and the breaker bar is really the best way to do it. I also have a torque wrench, which is another important tool. You want to put the bolts back onto the torque specification from the manufacturer. A regular 3/8 inch ratchet. And then as far as taking the car off, so we have this, I think, is a 15 millimeter. That's the size socket you need to take the lug nuts off. And then we have a half-inch socket, or the metric equivalent, which is a 13 millimeter. These can be used to take the bolts off that hold the caliper on. You also need a wrench, 11/16 wrench, because that bolt, I'll show you when we get to that, but there's a piece that will slide, so you use this to hold on to it. So this takes the wheel off, these two takes the brake caliper off, and then we have a 19 millimeter, which would be a 3/4 inch equivalent English socket to take the bolts off the back of the caliper housing. Then we have this 30, what is it called? T30 Torx screw that is going to be used to take off the rotor. So the other things that we need for parts, of course, you have to have the rotors themselves, two pairs of brake pads, one for each. This is for front or left and right wheels. You want to do the wheels in pairs always. And then finally we have some brake cleaner, which you're going to need at least one can, maybe two, to clean off the rotor, to clean off the parts, and we'll show you that too. And then some brake lubricant, which in my case came with the pads. You might need to get this at your auto parts store, but that's also a useful tool or part to have. So alright, let's get started. The other thing I guess I'll say before I really get into this, I've turned the wheel to the side. It just makes it a little bit easier to get to the parts that are on the brake housing itself. It's not necessary. I've done it both ways, but this is how we're going to start out, and let's get to it. Alright, so like I mentioned, step one of this whole job will be getting the caliper part off of the caliper housing. So this is the caliper. There's a brake line that comes in here that feeds the brake fluid into the brake itself. This is a bleeder valve. These two bolts right here hold this assembly onto the caliper itself. So first we have to get this off, and like I said, this nut is going to spin freely, so we have to hold this back piece right here with our 11/16 inch wrench so it doesn't move. So I have my my breaker wrench with my 13 millimeter socket. So let's see if this needs to get broken loose first. There we go. Now you see this this moving, so we're going to have to hold it on. Hold this nut with the 11/16. So there's a rounded part and then there's these flat parts. So the wrench will not go around the rounded part, it has to go on this flat part here. The other trick you can use is, once I move this now, the wrench is actually resting up against the frame there. Oops, guess that's not so good, but at least it will hold on. Okay, so once we get that bolt out, now this whole caliper assembly will rotate, and if we want to, we could take these brake pads off, but let's just leave this bolt in for now, and then we'll loosen up this bottom one. Okay, so now that both of these are off, the entire assembly just lifts out like that, and we want to set it, we're going to set it up here on top of this for now. Later on we'll suspend it a little bit better. So okay, so these are now we'll take the brake pads out. These are the brake pads. There's one on each side. The one on the back side has this thing, which is it tells you when you need to replace your brakes, because the brakes will wear down to the point that the metal tip rubs onto the rotor itself. So you can see these brake pads are pretty worn. And this one, the outside does not have that clip on it. Okay. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put these bolts that I took out back into the caliper, just so that I don't lose them and so I know where they go. I'm not going to, put them in very tight, just so they don't fall off and roll away. Okay, the next step is going to be to take the caliper housing off. Now let's try to get this caliper off. Again, there's two bolts on the back, one up at the top and one at the bottom. They're both, I hope they're 19 millimeter. When I put my 19 millimeter socket on there, it feels a little bit loose. I don't have an 18 millimeter, so that's the only thing I can try. The metric equivalent of this is a 3/4 inch. That's also loose. I tried 11/16, which I think is one size down. That doesn't fit. So hopefully this 19 millimeter will work. Also, just to mention, I hung the caliper itself with a bungee cord. The brake hose is still connected to it. So we don't want this to put strain on the brake hose so it doesn't damage it and leak fluid. That would be terrible. That's why we hang this up here using the bungee cords to get it out of the way. So, alright. Did I mention I'm not a professional mechanic? Okay, so here's the 19 millimeter socket. I've got my 1/2 inch breaker bar this time because these bolts are usually hard to get off. So, put this on and we'll give it a try. Oops, now see how that fell off? That's really not that. Okay, oh well, that wasn't so bad. That came right off, and I can loosen it with my fingers. The bottom one, okay, good. So these bolts both came off very easily, so we'll unscrew them completely and take the caliper housing off. So this just comes right off. And one thing we're going to do later is we're going to clean this up. If you can see, there's these metal pieces here, little metal spacers that there's one on each side, and they help the brake pads not move around. But we need to clean them up because they're really dirty. So we'll do that later. I'm going to take the bolts with me because we're also going to clean those off. All right, the next thing we need to do, and really the last part of the disassembly for this, is to take the rotor off. This is the rotor itself. It just kind of slides over the hub, and the only thing that's holding this on now is this little bolt that requires a T30 whatever this is, driver, I guess, to take off. So normally when the wheel is on, the lug nuts go into here, which also holds the rotor on. So we'll just take this off. Again, all we do is we have this T30. No es bueno. Let's see if I can hold this thing with my hand and open this up. Break it loose a little bit. There we go. Yeah, so I've only had cars with this. I've only had 2 cars that have this Torx screw, and both of them it's really easy to pop out. You can see, I think, how small this screw is. It's a very small screw, so it's easy to take off. Now, hopefully, that was really easy to get off. This rotor just popped right off. Sometimes you need to get a hammer and pound on it. You can see there's a lot of rust or corrosion or something inside this, and also on here. So before we put anything back together, we're going to get a wire brush and really and clean this up. Alright, so I'm kind of lazy, and I have a drill with and a wire brush, so I'm going to use that to try and get the rust off of here. Okay, now we use some of our brake clean just to get rid of the dust that's on here. And I did put some cardboard down on the floor, just have something to catch the brake clean. Alright, so there's still a little bit of rust on there, but we got most of the stuff off, and we just want to get a nice clean, smooth surface so the rotor won't rust onto this and make it harder to get off next time. Okay, so let's clean the rest of the brake parts now. Okay, so we're going to clean the caliper holder itself. So again, the two things we really want to clean are, well, the one, is these parts where the brake pads sit. So we'll clean both of these sides, and really that's it. The other thing you want to make sure is that these rubber boots move in and out on their own, which they both do. So if they don't, you can always put some grease inside there, but these both work fine. So let's just clean these off, take a couple minutes. The other thing that you don't have to do but might be nice is to clean off the threads on the bolts, because it will take off any old Loctite or any gunk that's on there, and then we'll spray these with some new Loctite before we put them on, just to make sure they stay in but don't get stuck. Okay, so now everything is sprayed off on this. We can start putting it back together. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the new rotor on. So one of the things about rotors is the surface here is coated with some kind of anti-rust thing. You can see there, I've also got it dirty by touching it. So we're going to spray it off a little bit with the brake cleaner. So I'm just going to put it on backwards, just kind of hang it on the rim here to make it easier to spray off. Spray this side off and give it a good spraying. All right, we'll just flip this over now. So I'm going to try not to touch the surface with my fingers. Flip it around, put it on the right way. We have to make sure that all these holes line up, including the guide hole, which I think is about right here. So let's put that in first. Okay, we'll turn this so it's straight up and down to make it easier to find that hole. There we go. So again, this Torx screw, the only purpose for it is to hold this rotor on while you're working on it. So it doesn't need to be super tight, just has to be on there so the rotor doesn't fall off. Okay, and now we'll spray this side off with the brake cleaner just to clean it a bit. Alright, now we'll put the caliper housing on. So the caliper housing basically can only go on one way. You have these where the screws go on to hold the caliper itself on. They have to be in the back, so it can't go on like this. It can't go on like this, so it can only go on one way. And then there's the bolt holes, one on the bottom again and one on the top. We just have to line these holes up with those. It goes behind them, and then put the bolt in. We'll get the top one started, and then we'll put the bottom one in. Okay, we've got them finger tight. Now I'm going to take my 19mm ratchet and I'm going to tighten them down. I don't know the torque spec for this. I wish I did, but I'm just going to get them as tight as I can, and it should be okay. Okay, good. Next we'll do the caliper housing itself, or the caliper itself. Before we can actually put the caliper on, we need to compress the cylinder. As you can see, the cylinder here is out. We need it to be all the way in. So the way to do that is we take one of the old brake pads and put it in here, and then use a C-clamp to compress the cylinder itself. So let's do that now. All right, there we go. So as you could see, as I turned the C-clamp, it just pushed that cylinder right back into the housing. So now it's pretty much flush with that. That'll enable us to get the brake pads on and fit this over the brake pads. So, all right, next step now is to just put this on and attach it. We're just going to do Actually, I think I'll put the brakes themselves in, the brake pads in, because I don't think I can move this enough to get the pads on once it's attached. So again, one thing we want to avoid is touching this pad surface. I already did touch it, so I'm gonna have to spray this with a little bit of brake cleaner. Then we also want to take this lubricant here and put it on the points that touch here and here. Some people put it on the back as well. I don't know if you need to or not, but I'll definitely put it on each end of the pad where it touches. So alright, so we'll get a little bit of this lubricant, put some on this side, make sure we don't get any on the pad itself. Put a little more on this end. Again, I think that's all you really need to do. And then spray the actual pad itself. A little brake fluid. And then put it on. So it fits right on, no problem. That's great. Now we'll do the other side. Alright. And I don't know if I need to say this, but the pad, of course, goes towards the rotor. So the last thing we need to do now is attach the caliper itself to the caliper housing. So again, now that we have the cylinder compressed, all we have to do is slide it over the top of this, and we'll make sure these are pushed in enough. Make sure that the brakes are pushed in all the way. So just slides over like that. Easy peasy. Right? And now we have to put these bolts on. So I forgot to do this on the bolt that holds the caliper housing on, but I'm going to put some of this Threadlocker, the blue, which I guess is the medium strength. So what this does, as far as I know, is it will make it easier to get these bolts off the next time, just in case. Not that these were hard to get off this time, but it's probably a good idea for everything you do, every bolt that you have, to add this Threadlocker Blue. I should have done this, like I said, for the caliper housing, and I should do it also for the screws that hold the wheel on. So there we go. I just have to tighten these bolts now. I had trouble getting it on the bottom because the brake line was kinked on the back, so I had to flip it over. So now I'm going to tighten the bolts. And again, I'm going to need my 11/16. I don't know the torque spec, unfortunately, so that's not good. I really should torque these to the specification, but oh well. So I just tighten them as well as I can and hope it's good. All right. So that is done. The brake pads have been replaced, the rotor's been replaced. I just need to, I'm going to spray it down one more time on the front with the brake cleaner, just to get off any extra gunk I might have gotten on by touching it. I'll try to do the back a little bit. So The last thing to do then is just to put the tire back on, and then I have to do the other side as well, but the process is exactly the same. And once I do get the tire back on and on both sides and replace everything, I need to make sure I pump the brakes to get the fluid back in here to compress this cylinder, because I pushed it all the way out. I don't have to add any brake fluid or bleed the line because I didn't remove this brake line. So basically we're done. Again, I apologize for the amateur nature of the video. Like I said, I'm not a professional auto mechanic, but I hope that the things I've shown you and even the mistakes I've made have helped you. Again, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.